the desert wind came low and cruel, dragging its nails across the valley. Naomi Carter sat alone in her wooden shack at the edge of Green Hollow, a black woman stitched into silence by the years. The night outside was thick with dust, a restless storm crawling over the plains. Inside, the kerosene lamp flickered, her one faithful companion. Its light painted her face in amber hues, catching on the smooth arcs of her cheekbones and the silver thread of exhaustion woven through her eyes. She had grown used to nights like this, the kind that sang of loneliness in small, merciless ways. The wind's hiss, the creak of old planks, the whisper of a world that had chosen to forget her. In Green Hollow, she was the stranger no one welcomed. To the men, she was a temptation to be condemned. To the women, a scandal waiting to happen. And to the children, she was a story told to keep them obedient. Don't end up like her. Naomi adjusted the torn shawl around her shoulders and tried to thread her thoughts into calm. But the storm had other plans. A knock broke through the wind, sharp, sudden, human. Her heart stumbled. For a moment, the whole house seemed to stop breathing with her. She turned her head toward the sound, her eyes widening in the dim light. No one came to her door, not at this hour, not ever. Green Hollow's people preferred their cruelty whispered, not delivered in person. Another knock, harder this time. Naomi rose slowly, bare feet whispering across the warped floorboards. Every creak echoed too loud. Her hand hovered over the latch. The wind bellowed through the cracks, carrying the taste of dust and fear. "Who's there?" she called, voice trembling despite her effort to sound steady. For a moment, nothing. Then, through the howl, came a man's voice, low and ragged. "Please, shelter." The sound of it struck through her chest, deep, honest, a voice carved by weather and road dust, not deceit. Still, caution tightened around her ribs. A woman alone did not invite strange men through her door, not if she wanted to keep her reputation from the teeth of gossip. But another gust crashed against the wall, rattling the windows, and in that noise she heard something else, an animal's whinny, panicked and hoarse. There was someone out there fighting the storm, and maybe losing. Naomi slid the latch free. The door flew open, wind tearing through the room like a wild thing. The lamp flickered, then died. Moonlight spilled through the doorway in thin silver veins, and there he stood. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, his coat heavy with dust, his breath came in clouds. One hand gripped the doorframe as if it were the last solid thing left in the world. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, but Naomi saw the roughness of his jaw, the cut of his cheekbones, and the pistol glittering at his hip. Her voice came out small, unsure. "My room, it only has one bed." The words weren't invitation. They were a warning. The man met her gaze, and when he spoke, his voice was steady as earth. "Then let us share it forever if need be." For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The storm, the fear, even the chill that had lived in her bones for years. She didn't know what to make of him, whether his words were jest or vow, but the tone left no doubt. This was a man who meant what he said. Naomi's fingers tightened on the edge of the door. Her pulse thudded hard in her throat. She wanted to shut him out, to hold on to the quiet safety of her solitude, but the truth was colder than any wind. She was tired of being alone. He did not move closer. He simply stood there, letting the storm rage around him. His gray eyes, clear now under the brim, met hers without pity, without claim, only steadiness. That, more than his words, disarmed her. "Come in," she said softly. The moment he crossed the threshold, something inside Naomi shifted. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even hope. It was the sense that her life, once small and sealed, had been cracked open. He removed his hat, set it on the table, and led his shivering horse to the small lean-to by the door. When he turned back, he moved with the weary grace of a man long acquainted with hardship. Naomi relit the lamp. The glow revealed his face more fully, sun-worn, scarred near the temple, but composed. "Name's Colton Hayes," he said. She nodded once. "Naomi Carter." For a time, neither spoke. The silence was strange, less an emptiness than an understanding. Colton crouched near the hearth, coaxing the fire back to life. His hands were steady, practiced. Naomi watched the sparks catch, light blooming in the gloom, until the room softened around them. "Thank you," he murmured, eyes on the flame. She hesitated, then replied, "Ain't no sin in kindness." But the words trembled, because in Green Hollow, kindness had always cost her dearly. Outside the wind roared on, but inside, warmth gathered slow and quiet. Naomi stood a few steps away, watching him. The sight of another human, one not recoiling from her, not twisting judgment into every glance, felt almost unbearable. As the fire rose, she felt her guard slipping. The man who knocked on her door did not ask questions about her skin, her solitude, or the stories the town spun in the dark. He simply sat in silence, letting the light touch them both. And for the first time in years, Naomi realized that silence did not always mean exile. Sometimes silence was shelter. The storm clawed against the walls, demanding entry, but the house held firm. And within it, two strangers, both weary, both exiled in their own ways, sat before the fire as if fate itself had steered them toward this night. Naomi looked up at the small bed in the corner, and then at the man beside the flame. Her heart trembled, caught between fear and something dangerously close to hope. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper, fragile, but certain. "Colton Hayes, you can stay till morning." He looked up, eyes steady. "If the dawn allows it." And in that answer, Naomi felt it, an unspoken truth curling warm beneath her ribs, the kind that would change everything.
Morning in Green Hollow broke pale and cold, the kind of light that made the red dust look like ashes. Naomi Carter wrapped her shawl tight and stepped out from her cabin, a wicker basket in hand. The night storm had quieted, but its traces lingered, the scent of wet earth, the low moan of wind fading through the mesquite. Behind her, smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, Colton Hayes had taken to repairing a cracked chair with quiet concentration, as though it were the most natural thing in the world for a stranger to mend a home that wasn't his. Naomi paused a moment before the door, watching him through the crack. His presence unsettled her in ways she could not name. For years she had known only silence, only the space left behind when others turned their backs. Now there was breath, footsteps, the low rasp of a man humming while he worked. The sound filled corners that had forgotten what it meant to be occupied. Still, she knew the world outside would not forgive easily. Green Hollow had a memory as long as its roads, and gossip longer still. At the market, the air buzzed with flies and the low din of voices. Men weighed sacks of grain, women traded news and judgment in equal measure. Naomi stepped into the square and felt the shift immediately, the small, invisible tremor that always followed her. Conversations fell to a murmur. Heads turned. She kept her eyes forward, walking as though she did not feel the weight of their stares pressing like pins against her back. The cornmeal stall stood near the well. Old Mrs. Brantley manned it with her usual sour expression. Naomi set her basket down gently, her fingers trembling only slightly. "A pound of cornmeal, ma'am." Her gaze flicked up, then down again. Her hands moved slow, as if the very request burdened her. Naomi laid her coins on the table, 3 tarnished pieces that clinked louder than necessary. The sound drew attention from nearby stalls. Behind her, a man's voice cut through the air, slick with malice. "Market's busy early. Guess the stray needs her bread." Laughter followed, sharp as thorns. Naomi's breath hitched, but she kept her spine straight. Years of surviving ridicule had taught her that silence was armor. She gathered her sack of meal and turned away, chin lifted. But no armor was perfect. The words slipped past, stinging as they always did. As she left the square, two women leaned in close by the apple cart, whispering loud enough for her to hear. "Heard she's got a man out there now," one said. The other smirked. "Ain't that just like her? Invite trouble straight into her bed." Naomi's hands tightened around the basket handle until her knuckles ached. She didn't look back, but the sound of their laughter followed her down the road like the clatter of stones against glass. By the time she reached the edge of town, her throat burned. Each step toward home felt heavier than the one before. The words of the townsfolk replayed in her head, cruel, familiar refrains that time had not dulled. She had long accepted that they would never see her as anything more than a curiosity, a shadow they preferred to cast out rather than understand. Yet today, their cruelty pressed deeper, because this time she was not entirely alone, and that, she knew, was what would truly scandalize them. When she reached the cabin, the first thing she saw was Colton. He was waiting on the porch, seated with his elbows resting on his knees, his hat tilted back. The sight stopped her breath for a moment, not because of the man's build or the gun at his side, but because of the stillness that clung to him, a kind of calm that looked unbreakable. "You went to town," he said simply, rising to his feet. Naomi nodded, setting the basket down. "Her had to not, supplies won't fetch themselves." Colton studied her for a moment. His eyes caught the flicker of something behind her calm. Hurt, anger, the thin tremor of a woman holding herself together by force of will. But he didn't pry. He only reached for the sack, taking it from her hands without comment. She watched him carry it inside, wordless gratitude tangled with something deeper. No man had ever lifted her burdens before, not even the smallest ones. Inside, the fire still burned from morning. Colton placed the meal on the table and turned to her. They said something. It wasn't a question. Naomi drew a slow breath, eyes fixed on the flame. "They always do." He stepped closer, not enough to crowd her, but enough for his presence to steady the air. "And you always listen." The words struck deeper than she expected. Naomi swallowed hard. "What else can I do? The whole town's ears belong to them." Colton's voice stayed quiet, but there was iron beneath it. "Then stop giving them your heart to feed on." Naomi blinked. It was a simple truth, but one she had never allowed herself to hear. In Green Hollow, silence had been her shield, but it had also been her prison. He turned toward the door, pausing only once to add, "You don't owe them shame." When he was gone, Naomi stood motionless before the fire. His words hung in the air, heavy and warm. Slowly, she sank into the chair, her hands pressed together. Outside, the wind began to rise again, brushing dust against the window. She could almost hear the market's whispers carried on the air, but this time they sounded distant, dim. For the first time, Naomi realized that the opinions of Green Hollow did not define her, at least not here, not now, not in the company of the man who had crossed her threshold without judgment. When Colton returned from tending the horse, he found her still seated, her face calm, her shoulders straight. He said nothing, only lit another stick in the fire and sat opposite her. The silence that settled between them was the same as last night's, quiet, vast, and alive. Naomi watched the flames climb and felt something stir within her. For years she had believed her worth measured by the whispers of others. Now, in the small cabin lit by firelight, she began to suspect that her value had always existed, only waiting for her to claim it. She lifted her chin, meeting Colton's gaze across the fire. "They can talk, but I'll stay," she said softly. Colton nodded once, then let them. And with that, the night closed around them, two outcasts, no longer defined by exile, but by the quiet defiance of choosing to remain.
Morning arrived, soft over the valley, its light stretching long fingers through the cracks in Naomi's cabin walls. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world rinsed in pale gold and stillness. Naomi Carter stirred from the bed, her body tense out of habit. For a moment, she forgot there was another soul in the house. Then she heard the rhythmic scrape of metal against wood. Colton Hayes, sharpening his knife on the porch. It was a sound she had once associated with fear. The town's men always carried blades and tempers both. But this rhythm was different, calm and unhurried, a music of patience. Naomi sat at the edge of the bed, smoothing the quilt. The one bed. For years it had been a symbol of her solitude. Now it felt like the first chapter of something unspoken. She adjusted her shawl and went to the window. Outside, Colton's figure was outlined against the light, coat sleeves rolled, hat pushed back. He worked on a broken plank, replacing the step she'd been meaning to fix for years. Naomi watched him, unsure what to do with the unfamiliar feeling rising in her chest, gratitude edged with disbelief. She wasn't used to a man fixing anything for her, let alone staying long enough to try. When she opened the door, the morning air met her with a chill and the scent of dust settling. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. Colton didn't look up. "I know, but it needs doing." The simplicity of it caught her. No grand gesture, no words meant to charm, just quiet purpose. He fit into the silence of her life like a man who understood how to share it rather than fill it. Naomi folded her arms, unsure how to stand before him. "You're a strange one, Colton Hayes. Most men would have taken shelter and then gone by dawn." Colton paused, setting down the knife. He met her gaze. "Maybe I've had enough of leaving." The words fell between them, heavy with truth. Naomi looked away before her heart betrayed her face. Inside, she prepared a thin stew, salted meat, wild greens, what little the pantry allowed. She half expected him to refuse it. Green Hollow's folk had always found reason to scorn what her hands made. But when she set the bowl before him, he ate in silence, every spoonful measured and deliberate. "You cook good," he said, after a while. She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "It's nothing." Colton shrugged. "Still better than dust." A small, startled laugh slipped from her throat. It had been years since laughter found her without permission. It felt almost dangerous, like touching something sacred. Colton's eyes softened, though his mouth didn't move. His silence said enough. By afternoon, Naomi followed him down to the creek with a basket of laundry. The sun hung high and the air hummed with cicadas. Colton led his horse to drink while Naomi knelt by the stones, rinsing cloth in the cold stream. The water numbed her fingers, but the rhythm steadied her thoughts. Colton splashed water on his face, then scooped a handful and flicked it toward her. A spray caught her cheek. She gasped, eyes wide in mock outrage. "You didn't?" He smirked, the smallest crack in his usually solemn expression. "Couldn't resist." She splashed back before she thought better of it. The cold struck her, and she laughed again,
Real laughter this time, bright, unguarded. The sound echoed off the rocks, strange and beautiful in its freedom. Colton only shook his head, smiling faintly, before turning back to the horse. But Naomi saw it, that hint of warmth, like the first light breaking through long clouds. When they walked home, their shadows stretched side by side across the dirt road. Naomi caught herself glancing at him more than once, studying the lines of his face, the steadiness in his stride. He didn't walk ahead of her, didn't lead or follow. He walked with her, and in that simple alignment, something inside her loosened. That evening, Naomi sat by the hearth braiding her hair, while Colton mended a harness by the fire. The room glowed amber, the air thick with the scent of smoke and stew. It was quiet, not the brittle silence she'd known before, but a peaceful one, alive with shared breath. After a long pause, Naomi spoke. "I've never been chosen." Her voice cracked slightly, the confession tasting like rust. "Never loved, never wanted. The town made sure of that." Colton's hand stilled on the leather strap. He looked up, his gray eyes steady. "That's not your fault." Naomi's breath caught. The words were simple, but they split something open. All her life she had believed the shame was hers to bear, her skin, her solitude, her difference. Now, in a few plain syllables, that belief began to crumble. "They fear what they don't understand," he added quietly. "That's all." She stared at the fire, her hands trembling slightly. "You say it's easy to forget." "It ain't easy, but you don't have to carry their fear on your back." Silence stretched again, but this time it comforted her. She felt the sting in her eyes before she realized tears had come. She turned away, wiping them quick. Colton didn't speak again, didn't move to touch her. He just sat there, letting the space between them fill with quiet acceptance. When Naomi finally looked up, the fire had burned low, casting his face in amber and shadow. She realized he wasn't just offering words, he was offering steadiness, a kind she'd never known. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You should rest." He nodded, pushing the chair back. "You too." As he moved to the bed, Naomi hesitated, heart fluttering like a trapped bird. The one bed, the same bed that had once been the symbol of her loneliness. Now it was something else, a threshold between what she had been and what she was becoming. Colton settled on one side, leaving space between them. Naomi lay down carefully, her back to him, the warmth of the fire fading into the softness of breath behind her. Outside, the wind had quieted. Inside, two souls rested under one roof, neither belonging to the world that had scorned them, but finding, at last, belonging in each other's silence. And as Naomi drifted toward sleep, she thought, perhaps healing begins not in grand gestures, but in the quiet work of two lives learning to breathe together.
By late spring, the land around Green Hollow had turned the color of rust and honey. The rains had passed, leaving behind a wide hush that carried the scent of sage and dust. Naomi Carter stood at the edge of the valley, her shawl drawn close, the wind tugging gently at the loose curls that had escaped her braid. Before her stretched a horizon she had never dared to dream of, rolling grasslands gilded by the sun, and far off a timber house rooted against the light like a promise made solid. Behind her, Colton Hayes guided his horse up the ridge, the hooves striking slow, steady rhythms into the dry earth. The quiet between them was not empty. It was charged with the gravity of something about to change.
Naomi turned as he reached her, his shadow long beside hers. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice cautious, threaded with disbelief. Colton's gaze followed the sweep of the land below. "My home," he said simply. "Hadn't been lived in for years. Thought maybe it's time to change that." Naomi blinked, uncertain if she'd heard right. "You brought me here? Why?" He looked at her then, and the answer was already in his eyes before he spoke. "Because I'm done wandering, and because a house means nothing if there's no one to come home to." For a moment Naomi could only stare. The house stood far below, its weathered walls catching the light, its porch wide and welcoming. She'd spent her whole life looking at houses from the outside, never crossing their thresholds, never invited past the line where warmth began. A tremor passed through her, not fear exactly, but something deeper, an ache born of too many years believing she did not belong anywhere. "That's too much," she murmured, shaking her head. "Too big, too fine. I can't." "You can," Colton said, his tone calm but unyielding. "You've built a life out of nothing, Naomi. You've kept your place standing when no one helped you. You belong anywhere you choose to stand." The words landed heavy and warm, like sunlight after a storm. She turned back toward the house. For the first time, hope hurt. They rode down together. The closer they came, the more real the place became. The smell of cut pine and old smoke, the creak of the porch boards under their boots. Naomi ran her hand along the railing, her fingertips tracing grooves left by years of weather. The wood was cool, solid, alive. Colton pushed the door open, the hinges sighing in protest. Inside, dust drifted through beams of light like soft ghosts. The air smelled of timber, tobacco, and thyme. A wide hearth sat cold against the far wall, and beside it an old table waited, scarred and sturdy. Naomi stepped in slowly, as if the floor might vanish beneath her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's a start." She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in, the shelves, the thick beams overhead, the window framing a slice of sky. Her mind could hardly hold it. For years, her life fit inside a single room. Now she stood in a home large enough to hold silence without loneliness. Her eyes fell to the far door. "And that?" "The bedroom," Colton replied. Naomi hesitated, her breath catching. She crossed the floor, her steps soft, and pushed the door open. The sight met her like a blow of tenderness. A bed stood in the center of the room, wide and covered in a faded wool blanket. The window beside it let in a wash of golden light. She reached out, running her hand along the frame. All her life she had thought of beds as symbols of what she lacked: comfort, warmth, companionship. Now the word felt new. Colton appeared behind her, his reflection faint in the glass. "I know it's not much, needs work, but I reckon 2 hands make lighter labor than 1. Naomi turned to him. "You mean for me to stay?" "I mean for you to make it home," he said simply. For a long moment the air between them held only the sound of the wind pushing against the shutters. Naomi's throat tightened. "Colton, you don't know what the town will say. You'll be marked for standing with me." He smiled faintly, that same small, unshakable curve of lips that had steadied her since the night of the storm. "They already mark me, a drifter, a gun hand, a man who doesn't know his place. Let them talk. I've found mine." Her vision blurred with sudden tears, not of sorrow, but of recognition, the kind that comes when a life too long starved of grace is finally offered a morsel of it. Outside the wind picked up, rolling through the grass in slow waves. Naomi stepped closer to the window, watching the valley stretch out, wide and untamed. "It's too quiet," she murmured. Colton chuckled softly. "Give it time. Quiet's only lonely until you fill it with your own noise." She smiled despite herself. "You sound sure of everything." "Only this," he said, "that a man can build fences, barns, walls, but it ain't home until there's someone to call it so." Naomi turned to him then, truly turned, her face open and unguarded. For the first time in years she did not shrink beneath another's gaze. "And you'd have me be that someone?" Colton stepped forward, his boots soft against the wood. "If you'll have me." The air in the house held only the sound of the wind pushing against the shutters. Naomi's throat tightened. "I'll try," she whispered. "I've lived too long behind doors closed to me. Maybe it's time I open one myself." Colton reached for her hand, not to claim, but to seal what was already understood. Their fingers met, rough against rough, and the air seemed to shift. The wind outside swept against the house, testing its strength. The walls stood firm. Naomi looked around the room once more, the bed, the light, the valley beyond, and felt the truth of it settle deep in her bones. This was not the echo of her old life. It was the beginning of another. Winter came quietly to the valley. The first flakes fell like whispers, slow and deliberate, softening the hard lines of the world. By mid-season, the hills were buried under a thick white hush, and the timber house stood firm against it, a single warm pulse in a world gone pale. Naomi Carter stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup. Frost had stitched delicate veins along the glass, and beyond it the land lay still. The house smelled of wood smoke and baking bread, the kind of scent that had once belonged only to other people's homes. Now it was hers. Behind her, the sound of fire filled the silence, the crackle of wood, the low sigh of heat spreading through the room. Colton Hayes sat near the hearth, boot propped against the stone, his shirt sleeves rolled, his face bathed in amber light. He was oiling his revolver, the motion steady, unhurried. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, testing the seams, but it could no longer find a way in. Naomi watched him for a long time before speaking. "You ever get tired of quiet?" Colton didn't look up. Not when it's shared. The answer drew a smile she hadn't felt coming. Shared. The word carried a weight she had never known before he'd stepped through her door months ago. In Green Hollow, everything had been taken from her. Dignity, belonging, the ease of being seen without judgment. But here, in this house wrapped in snow, everything felt returned. She turned back to the window. "It still feels strange," she murmured, "waking up and not hearing the town's gossip outside my door." "You'll get used to peace. Takes a while to trust it, that's all." "Trusting peace, that's a funny thing to learn. It's harder than fighting," he said. He set the revolver aside, the gleam of metal catching the firelight. Then he rose, crossing the room to stand beside her. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight. Naomi didn't move, though she could feel the warmth of him near, the kind of warmth that didn't fade with distance or time. "You've made this place something, Naomi," he said quietly. "Didn't realize how empty it was until you filled it." Her eyes flicked toward him, uncertain. Compliments had always been weapons in other men's mouths, but Colton's words carried no edge, no transaction, just plain truth. "I only kept it alive," she replied softly. "You built it." "No," he shook his head. "No, I might have raised walls, but you gave it a heart." Naomi lowered her gaze, her breath fogging the glass. Her reflection looked different than it once had, fuller somehow, softened by light and warmth. She saw not the outcast the town had named her, but a woman who had survived. When she turned, Colton was still watching her, his gray eyes steady. "You should rest," he said low. "Storm's coming heavy tonight." She nodded, setting her cup down, but made no move to leave. "You'll stay by the fire?" He smiled faintly. "Not if you'd have me elsewhere." The words hung in the space between them, simple and sure. Naomi's heart beat faster, not out of fear, but from the knowledge of what had already changed. This man had crossed her threshold once as a stranger. Now he stood as the one person who saw her without shame. She turned toward the bedroom, and he followed, slow and careful. The fire's glow spilled across the doorway, chasing shadows up the wall. Inside, the room was warm, the wool blanket thick, the bed large enough to hold two without crowding. Naomi stopped at its edge, fingertips brushing the coarse fabric. Colton stood in the doorway, waiting, not pressing. The silence between them pulsed with meaning. Naomi drew a deep breath, her voice trembling. All my life I slept waiting for morning to come, wondering if another day alone was worth it. I don't want to wait anymore. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable but soft around the eyes. You don't have to. When she turned to him, he took her hand, rough against delicate skin, strong but gentle. He didn't pull her in, he let her decide the distance. Naomi searched his face and saw no pity, no hunger, just steadfastness, the kind that doesn't need words. She nodded once. That was all the permission the night required. They lay side by side beneath the wool blanket, the wind howling faintly beyond the walls. Naomi listened to the rhythm of his breathing, steady and grounding. For the first time she didn't shrink from another's nearness. She didn't brace for judgment. She simply rested. Colton's voice came low in the dark. You don't have to be afraid of being seen. Naomi turned her head toward him, eyes glistening. I'm not afraid anymore. Outside, snow thickened, falling harder, faster, until the world beyond their walls vanished into white. Inside, the house glowed like a lantern in the storm. The fire popped, sending tiny sparks into the air. Naomi closed her eyes. It's strange, she whispered. I spent so long believing I wasn't worth staying for. But now... Colton brushed his thumb over her knuckles. Now you know better. Tears gathered but didn't fall. She smiled through them instead, the kind of smile that comes after years of holding sorrow too tight. You ever wonder why the Lord brings two people together after so much hurt? Colton's answer was slow. Maybe because he knows they'll understand what it costs to stay. The words filled the room like a prayer. Naomi let them settle deep, the way warmth sinks into cold bones. The wind clawed once more, hard against the walls, but the house did not tremble. Its beams held firm, its hearth alive. Naomi's head rested against Colton's shoulder, her hands still in his. For the first time, she could feel her heart ease in her chest, no longer braced for breaking. She whispered, barely audible, My room only had one bed. Colton smiled into the dark, and it's enough for two. A soft laugh escaped her, half sigh, half wonder. They stayed like that as the snow thickened outside, wrapping the house in white silence. Within its walls there was no loneliness left, no echoes of gossip, no ghosts from Green Hollow's cruel voices, only the sound of fire and the shared breath of two people who had learned to rebuild not just a house, but the meaning of belonging. When dawn came, the world would be buried in snow, but Naomi would rise knowing she was no longer a woman waiting behind closed doors. She was the keeper of a home, the partner of a man who had chosen to stay, not from mercy, but from love. And as the fire burned down to embers, Naomi smiled into the quiet. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of morning.